On December 7, 1941, Japan won a tactical victory, but Admiral Yamamoto already knew they had just guaranteed their own annihilation. In the Ota district of Tokyo, celebrations erupted in the streets below. Japanese carrier planes had just struck Pearl Harbor with devastating precision, sinking or damaging 8 battleships, killing 2,400 Americans and destroying 350 aircraft. It was a tactical masterpiece, executed with extraordinary skill and surprise. Yet Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat alone in his office, consumed by dread, not triumph. While military leaders celebrated what they believed was a decisive blow against American naval power, Yamamoto understood a devastating truth that would haunt him until his death. Having spent years in the United States, he knew what his colleagues refused to believe. America possessed an industrial capacity that utterly defied Japanese comprehension. He had personally seen the steel mills of Pittsburgh, which produced more steel in a single day than some Japanese mills did in a month, and the endless assembly lines of Detroit's automobile factories. The mathematics of war his colleagues celebrated would soon become the mathematics of Japan's doom. The very attack they celebrated would prove to be the catalyst for the most rapid industrial mobilization in human history. A transformation so complete that within 6 months, American production would shatter every assumption Japanese war planners had made. America, once aroused to fury, would be unstoppable. The collapse of Japanese strategic assumptions began not with a military defeat, but with a presidential speech. Just 30 days after Pearl Harbor, on January 6, 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt stood before Congress and announced production goals that Japanese intelligence dismissed as impossible propaganda. The targets for a 2-year period seemed fantastical: 185,000 aircraft, 120,000 tanks, 55,000 anti-aircraft guns, and 16 million tons of merchant shipping. To put these numbers into context, Japan had built only 5,000 aircraft in 1941, while America had already built 19,000 that same year. Roosevelt was demanding 60,000 aircraft in 1942 alone, 12 times Japan's annual output. Japanese military planners simply could not conceive of industrial capacity on this scale, ignoring Yamamoto's earlier warning: "If we are ordered to do it, I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months, but I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years." They believed American society was too soft, too decadent, and too divided to mobilize for total war. They were catastrophically wrong. Within weeks, the American industrial machine began a complete metamorphosis. The War Production Board was established a mere 40 days after the attack, granting Chairman Donald Nelson near absolute authority to commandeer factories and redirect raw materials. The speed of conversion was astonishing. General Motors, the world's largest automobile manufacturer, produced its last civilian car on February 10, 1942, 64 days after Pearl Harbor. By midnight, that same assembly line was already being reconfigured for tank production. By March 1st, Ford's massive Willow Run plant, built outside Detroit, had begun manufacturing B-24 Liberator bombers. At its peak, Willow Run produced 1 complete bomber every 63 minutes. Every major American automobile manufacturer ceased civilian production, producing exactly 0 civilian vehicles for the duration of the war. Instead, these factories, which had built 4.5 million cars in 1941, were now churning out tanks, aircraft engines, and military vehicles in quantities Japanese planners had calculated were mathematically impossible. This industrial flexibility, the ability to quickly retool car engine lines into aircraft engine lines and assembly workers into tank drivetrain assemblers, was something Japan, with its dedicated and inflexible facilities, simply did not possess. The sheer scale of this production immediately overwhelmed Japanese expectations. In 1942, America produced 47,000 military aircraft, nearly 10 times Japan's annual output of around 5,000. By 1943, America produced 85,000 aircraft, a number representing more planes than existed in the entire world just a decade earlier. By the war's end in 1945, cumulative American production reached 297,000 military aircraft, while Japan, mobilizing its entire industrial base for total war, built only 85,611 aircraft in total from 1941 to 1945. This more than 3-to-1 ratio defined the war. America fought a war of material abundance, accepting losses but knowing they could be replaced faster than they were destroyed. Japan fought a war of scarcity, watching their numerical strength dwindle month by month.
This transformation required a fundamental reorganization of American society. Boeing's Seattle plant, which employed 4,000 workers before Pearl Harbor, peaked at 30,000 workers operating 3 shifts, 7 days a week. This massive labor mobilization drew on every segment of society. Women, who made up less than 1% of the aircraft industry workforce before the war, constituted up to 65% in some facilities by 1945. The iconic Rosie the Riveter was not mere propaganda. She was an economic reality, representing millions of women who welded fuselages, assembled complex engines, and operated heavy machinery, performing tasks previously reserved for men. Simultaneously, African Americans, systematically excluded from skilled work in peacetime, found new employment opportunities in defense plants, fueled by Executive Order 8802, which prohibited racial discrimination. Over 1 million African Americans worked in defense industries by 1945, gaining skills and wages that would lay the groundwork for the post-war civil rights movement. Teenagers, the elderly, and disabled individuals also joined the effort, contributing to a total of over 18 million Americans working in defense-related industries by 1944. Japan had no equivalent mobilization of female or previously excluded labor, reflecting a rigid industrial culture and a lack of the sheer population base necessary to match America's total war effort. The Liberty Ship program perfectly demonstrated American industrial ingenuity. These cargo vessels, designed for rapid construction using standardized components and semi-skilled labor, began rolling off production lines at unprecedented rates. While one ship, the SS Robert E. Peary, was famously built in under 5 days as a demonstration, even the normal construction time averaged a remarkable 42 to 50 days. At peak production in 1943, American shipyards launched 3 Liberty ships per day, equating to 75 vessels per month. By war's end, America had produced 2,710 Liberty ships, representing more shipping capacity than Japan's entire merchant marine possessed at the start of the war. Japan, operating at maximum wartime capacity, could only manage about 15 ships per month. This overwhelming disparity allowed America to sustain military operations across 2 oceans, simultaneously supplying forces in Europe and the Pacific, while Japan struggled to supply its own frontline forces. By 1945, the systematic maritime blockade by American submarines had reduced Japan's merchant fleet to less than 10% of its pre-war tonnage, effectively strangling Japanese industry of raw materials and military forces of supplies. The mathematical impossibility of Japanese victory was clear to objective analysts. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, a principal architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, wrote in his diary in March 1942, quote, "Barely 3 months into the war, we achieved tactical surprise, but I fear we have guaranteed strategic defeat." End quote. The Americans are not collapsing as we predicted. They are building. They are angry. They are unified. His superiors, refusing to acknowledge this reality, quietly removed him from strategic planning. The first significant check to Japanese expansion came at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942. While tactical ship losses were roughly even, Japan's loss of 90 aircraft and 77 experienced pilots was catastrophic. Japanese naval aviation training programs were lengthy and produced few graduates. Replacing those veteran pilots would take a year or more. American factories and flight schools, however, operated 24 hours a day, constantly replacing losses and training new pilots. The attrition equation favored America overwhelmingly. Then came Midway, June 4th through the 7th, 1942, exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor, just as Yamamoto had warned. The battle was the decisive turning point of the Pacific War because it revealed a fatal strategic vulnerability that American production would relentlessly exploit. Japan committed its core naval air power, 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. They sailed into a trap set by American codebreakers who had cracked Japanese naval codes. The battle was decided in 5 minutes when American dive bombers found 3 Japanese carriers with their decks crowded with armed and fueled aircraft. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were instantly transformed into uncontrollable infernos. Later that day, Hiryu was also discovered and destroyed. In a single day, Japan lost 4 irreplaceable fleet carriers and over 100 irreplaceable pilots. The strategic mathematics were absolute. America lost 1 carrier, which could be replaced faster than Japan could train pilots. Japan lost 4 carriers and pilots that could not be replaced at all.
The disparity in production became a chasm. In the 3 years following Midway, Japan completed only 6 new carriers. America, in that same period, completed 17 massive Essex-class carriers, each one larger, faster, and more capable than its Japanese counterparts. The overwhelming dominance extended to every category of production. America produced 86,000 tanks during the war, including 33,000 superior Sherman medium tanks. Japan produced only 6,500 light tanks. American factories built 2 million military trucks compared to Japan's 165,000, a 12-to-1 logistics advantage that kept American forces mobile and supplied while Japanese troops often starved. Overall, America launched approximately 6,800 naval vessels during the war. Japan completed fewer than 1,000. American production was not merely greater in scale, it was fundamentally different in technological sophistication. The B-29 Superfortress bomber perfectly exemplified this difference. Designed specifically to strike Japan from distant bases, the B-29 was the most complex production aircraft of the war, carrying heavy bomb loads across 3,000-mile distances at altitudes above 30,000 feet. Each bomber contained over 40,000 different parts and consumed 12 tons of aluminum. America would build approximately 4,000 of these technological marvels between 1943 and 1945. This single B-29 production run represented industrial capacity and technological sophistication that exceeded Japan's entire wartime aircraft industry output. The strategic bombing campaign demonstrated the futility of Japanese resistance. In March 1945, Major General Curtis LeMay shifted tactics to low-altitude nighttime incendiary raids against Japanese cities. The results were devastating. The firebombing of Tokyo on March 9 through 10, 1945, employed 334 B-29s and created a firestorm that destroyed 16 square miles, killing approximately 100,000 people in a single night, more casualties than the initial atomic bombings. Within weeks, similar raids systematically destroyed major urban areas across Japan. Furthermore, at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, 2 years after Midway, the strategic cost of attrition became fatally apparent. The Japanese Navy, attempting to defend the Mariana Islands, committed its carriers with pilots who were hastily trained recruits replacing the veterans lost in earlier battles. They were slaughtered in what American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Over 600 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in one day, while American losses were only 30, an exchange ratio exceeding 20-to-1. The American industry could replace those 600 planes in less than a week. Japan required months. This battle effectively ended Japanese carrier aviation as a significant force. The final, ultimate expression of American industrial and scientific capacity was the Manhattan Project. This secret program employed over 130,000 people and cost approximately $2 billion, more than Japan's entire defense budget for some years of the war. Facilities like Oak Ridge, Tennessee, built from scratch in 1943, consumed 1/7 of all electrical power generated in the United States, more than New York City. Hanford, Washington, constructed nuclear reactors on an unprecedented scale to produce plutonium. This massive, experimental undertaking based on barely understood science was an organizational marvel that could only be achieved by the unique combination of scientific expertise, financial resources, and industrial base that America possessed. On August 6 and 9, 1945, B-29 bombers dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 3 days later, Emperor Hirohito cited the new cruel bomb as justification for surrender. The strategic analysis is undeniable. Pearl Harbor, meant to be a decisive blow, was the trigger for an inevitable collapse. Yamamoto's prediction of 6 months of success, followed by mounting difficulties, proved accurate to the day. From the moment of Midway onward, Japanese defeat became mathematically certain. The entire Pacific War, with all its battles, sacrifices, and tactical complexities, was ultimately decided in the factories. America possessed the overwhelming industrial capacity, Japan did not. That difference was decisive, determinative, and ultimately overwhelming, transforming Japan from a confident aggressor to a defeated and occupied nation in less than 4 years.